Okay, so we're live. We will wait for the audience, if there is an audience, to build up, and then you can tell me the great story that you were telling me. So you were out this morning tarmacking.
Yes, sort of. That's what happens when you come out from the dizzy heights of being vice chairman of a company. You end up doing odd jobs, and it's a long story. But people said to me, "What are you going to do when you stop?" And I said, "Actually, I'm quite worried about it." So I said, "I'll probably cut grass or do something like that." So one of the well-known estate agents in Oxford phoned me about a month after I left FK, and they said, "Oh, we've got a retired client whose 80-year-old gardener has just retired, looking for a new gardener. Would you go and give them a call?" So I thought, why not? You know, I'm not doing a great deal. I'll take up my own words. And so off I went. And I ended up with 3 neighbours all at once, would you believe, all in their early 90s, mid 90s, all needing the help. And I enjoy gardening. And I thought, you know what, I'll do it for a bit and see how it goes. 2 years later, I'm still going on a Thursday helping them. But one of them's asked me to do a few odd jobs. So this morning I was laying tarmac. Anyway, you know.
Incredible. Well, look, we've got a few people watching now. So firstly, thanks very much for joining me. I'm really grateful for your time. You've been described by Spencer Lawrence, who I think is exceptional at Paramount Property, as the godfather of lettings, an inspirational character, kind, thoughtful and calm. You were 32 years at Finders Keepers, which was an agency in Oxfordshire. You managed over 3,000 properties, which is phenomenal. You left about 3 years ago.
That's right.
Set up your own consultancy, obviously a bit of gardening on the side by the sounds of things, and tarmacking. So I just want to say thank you. I mean, I'm really excited and looking forward to speaking to you and to get somebody on my lunchtime learnings who is so highly regarded in the industry. You know, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and there was a nice article on you from Property Industry Eye. Countrywide pays tribute to Webster, as they call you. I don't know what happened to Frank, but it's an incredible article. So thanks very much for joining.
No problem.
So you were sharing before we came on there, and hi Chris, thanks very much for joining us. We're both well. So you were talking about your journey to becoming an estate agent. So would you be kind enough to what got you into it?
Well, it's thanks to my father, really. I was saying I came back from Germany, where I set my heart on working with my German A-level. Long story short, my uncle had an electronics business, so I went off to Germany to seek my fortune, but it didn't work out, and I came back, and my father said, "Well, you better get a job." And one day he said, "There's one here you could go for," and it was an advert for a trainee negotiator. To be honest, I didn't really know what that meant, and having never bought a house or rented at that stage of my life, you know, off I went, and I got the job and ended up starting my career in a estate agency, and did about 7 years of that before I accidentally bumped into a lady who'd started a business in Oxford, helping landlords overseas acquire property, or they weren't landlords really then, they were just buying a property to keep a foothold in the UK, and obviously they then wanted them managed and let ongoing. So that was Finders Keepers that Mary had sort of created about 2 or 3 years before that. So I was lucky because I had a chartered surveyor that I was working with when I was first involved, and he taught me everything. He was quite strict, you know, but taught me everything that I needed to know for the future, which I didn't know then, about property, and it came in so useful when I got involved in property management. Yeah, so it was all accidental, and you know, I really enjoyed it from the first day I started in the estate agency in the centre of Oxford. And property management, you know, when Mary approached me, she said, "Why don't you come and help the buyer rather than the seller?" And I was getting a little frustrated at the time, acting for sellers who weren't really appreciative. The lawyers were terrible, and they just were having long lunches and had no regard for our income. And not helping matters back then. So I thought, yeah, why don't I have a switch? Everybody told me I was mad and said you're going into a dirty business, which was actually true. I mean, you know, it had a really bad reputation then. There were about 6 agents in Oxford. Most of them were out and out rogues. I'm sorry, but, you know, it really was quite terrible. Mary's passage into letting and management was slightly accidental because we were buying property for purchasers. And it was quite interesting, you know, going in to see my old estate agent friends, you know, viewing them and acquiring them on behalf of clients. And obviously, as we grew, we then developed more on the letting and management, and the letting and management became our main, you know, hardcore part of our business. So, but we carried on acquiring, and, you know, that was one of the things that I think set us apart from the competition. And very few agents in Oxford still to this day have an acquisition service as part of their letting and management service. But it was a great feeder into the portfolio, and we can touch on that again a little bit more. But yeah, I never looked back really. And, you know, when I stepped down 3 years ago, it was very strange indeed.
Wow, what a journey. So going back, you said you learned a lot from the chartered surveyor. People watching this, you know, can you share some of the things that you learned from them? And hi, Harry, thanks for joining us from Dorset today. Appreciate it. And please, if you're watching, like it and share it, because as Spencer describes, we've got the godfather of lettings on today.
It's going to cost me when I see him. Yeah, what I learned, well, I think I learned about discipline. I learned about the fact that, you know, you were dealing with people's assets. And, you know, he wouldn't let me go off and value a property by myself until I'd had probably 8 months to a year of going in with him, sitting in the car outside, actually. And he asked me what the value was of that property before we even stepped in the door. And then we went to the end of the garden, having walked around the house, and we bought ourselves a little bit of time where he had written his figure down and he asked me on the spot what I thought that property was worth. So, you know, my training was very much hands-on. With him, he was pointing out structural defects and things that could cause a problem. You know, so I learned a huge amount. And he was also a good businessman and a great networker. And I soon realized that, you know, you needed several things to be an estate agent stroke letting agent. You needed to be able to, you know, deal with people of all sorts and win their confidence quickly. You needed to be an expert in what you were doing. And that was constantly learning, and you know, you just needed to, as I say, just keep developing really, and that's what we did. Is that your dog?
My dog is joining us to say thank you, Frank, the godfather of lettings, for joining us as well. They're all getting involved. Just wait for the other dog to start barking now. Right. So they're all going to go off. This is what makes it real, isn't it? So having your dogs in the background. So there you go. They're out in the garden now. So so you touched on about rogues. And I know you're very passionate about raising standards in the industry and agents being more professional. How do you think agents, you know, obviously we've got Roper and talk of Roper and being bought in, and is it going to be bought in? And there's another consultation that's just obviously in progress at the moment. What can agents be doing to raise their standards in the industry and be more professional, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's many things that they can be doing. I mean, first off, on the Roper, you know, we've been, all those of us that have been involved in business for ages, and those I'm sure that starting now and want to be good agents are all wondering why there isn't any, you know, regulation that controls and keeps everybody in control, with a sort of police force in the background, as it were, policing properly to make sure that the roads can't continue. And you know, it's happened in the banking and the finance world. We've seen it in journalism. Gradually, regulation in those industries has been necessary. And, you know, here we are dealing with probably, you know, the biggest asset that somebody, and the most amount of money that somebody's probably ever going to part with in their lives. And, you know, the attachment of going for a mortgage and so on and so forth. Even the bank of mum and dad now, you know, the largest lender. It's all a big thing. And yet here we are, technically, any of us can start and become an estate agent at the drop of a hat, effectively. with nobody forcing us to have training to be qualified, you know, and that's wrong. And if you sit in front of an accountant or your lawyer or your financial advisor, you would jolly well expect that they would have gone to law school or accountancy school. They will have done their exams, which are quite hard, and that flushes out the serious and those that are going to do it properly. And you know that they will have experience as well, which of course takes time to develop, but they'll have a senior person coaching them and mentoring them. And that's how it should be in a estate agency. And I think it was Henry Price sent a tweet in the days when I was tweeting saying, what will exams do for me and a whole bunch of us that have been in the business for ages? And he's missing the point wholly that maybe those in the latter stages of their careers, yes, it's probably not going to make much difference and they've gained a huge amount of experience. But it's fundamentally wrong that, you know, you can sort of be giving people advice on buying or selling and indeed renting. And indeed, a good friend of mine, Kate Faulkner, she's championing very hard and has been, like many of us in the past and now in the future, you know, trying to get government to realise that the agents, you know, the collective of us, we want to be regulated. And I just hope that, you know, other things don't get in the way. Sadly, I think it may not happen in this Parliament, but, you know, and then obviously COVID's come along and added huge sort of issues for government. But we must get to the stage where, you know, you have to take an exam. You have to, you know, be qualified to be giving people, you know, advice. And we're trying to put a roof over somebody's head. That's the purpose of estate agency. Either a buyer, you know, obviously we're acting for the vendor, but our remit is that we're giving advice about a roof over our head, a safe roof, and that's the same in renting and when we act for landlords and tenants. You know, and I think we need to get to a situation where, yes, you'll have a specialism, but effectively, if you're involved in estate agency, whatever facet of estate agency, you will know about first-time buyers, you will know about first-time renters, you will know about help to buy, you know, you will know about assisted purchase, affordable homes. You know, you will know everything that there is to know, because otherwise you're not in the right position and you shouldn't be giving people advice on moving into a property. So, yeah, I think, you know, so first thing, we need the industry to be regulated. Second thing is, you know, you've just got to have systems and processes in place, and you've got to have training, and you've got to want to be trained, and you've got to be learning every day and every year that goes on. And it's happened in the teaching profession. You know, there used to be bad teachers. Having been the school governor for many years recently, you know, it's very encouraging to see that it's, you know, there's proper sort of, you know, things that teachers have to do now constantly to keep improving, and that education for our children is constantly under the focus, and the way teachers are observed, you know, and the way governors work with the headmaster. So that, you know, it needs to be the same sort of thing in estate agency with continual professional development, so that, you know, we constantly are good at what we do. So, yeah, I think there's lots of things we can be doing.
And at Finders Keepers, what training systems did you have in place there?
Yeah, I think we recognised very lately, as we sort of started to expand, that, you know, it was very important to train. We went for the Investors in People Award back in the late 80s and were slightly sceptical. I think it was a bit of a government quango, but actually it had a really good theory behind it. And that is that, first of all, your business plan, if indeed you had one, and I think it's fair to say we didn't really then, your business plan needs to be transparent and shared with your staff. And, you know, you need to then give them the tools to work with you and go on the same journey that you're heading for. And if they've got gaps, you know, in their knowledge skills, they need filling. And I think the way we were successful was thank goodness we recognized that, you know, we needed to spend quite a lot of time and money, the two go together. And we ended up with a budget for training, which was also married up against the benefits to each individual. So there was a cost versus benefits analysis. And we ended up spending a considerable sum of our, you know, income on training. And just as you need your offices to look smart, you need your staff to be smart in the sense of streetwise, but also the theory that goes with the practitioner side of it. And obviously when the NVQs came along, it was an obvious to me that we needed all of our staff to be qualified in the technical award for letting and management. And the company still continues with that theme of everybody after a probationary period being put on the NVQ skills for letting and management, and anybody wanting to run an office or any director is on level 4. So we did a huge amount of training, and it still continues to this day in the company. And I think that's one of the key things. It's easy to sort of cut the training down when things are tight, but in the end, once your staff feel confident, all our staff, none of us wanted to take exams, but the self-esteem of all of us we just felt so much better, and the staff felt hugely confident dealing with tenants and landlords once they understood a bit more of the theory behind it.
So if you were setting up your own business today, first thing you would do, take those NVQs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole theory of the ROPA recommendation, is that, anybody trading will have to be qualified, but you do need to have the experience, and that does take time, clearly. So that's why you need people in the industry who have been there and done that. And I guess there's a downside of all this sort of acquisition, and obviously you can't stop aging, but it's very important that there's a spread of experience, I think, in every business, because you do need those of us that have been there, done that, in the midst of the younger people coming into the industry, to give them that little bit of comfort and sort of care and TLC, and to talk to and go out with on valuations, and help with difficult issues. And obviously COVID has given us a little bit more time in our own worlds, but prior to that we were all charging around like dervishes, and people these days don't have much time. There's not much time to say thank you. Everybody wants things done now. Anyway, I think it's very important that you still have a mix of experiences and ages in that business.
How did you get the buy-in of your team then? Because there's so many agents out there that struggle to get the buy-in of I know the importance of training, and at Green and Company we would have regular training once a month, if not more frequently, especially when we had new starters. Yeah. But obviously you had some people there that just it just ticks off a box and that's it. Obviously it's more than that. So how did you create that culture within Finders Keepers, where everybody understood the importance of training, and it was an investment rather than a cost?
Absolutely. I think it starts right from even before you take that person on, in terms of the way that you look at, the qualities that you're looking for in those people. I mean, first of all, you need to understand what the company's mission is, so that you know that off by heart and the staff buy into that. You need to have company values. I know they all sound old hat type stuff, but I go to so many businesses and they haven't got a plan, they haven't got a mission, they haven't got a purpose, they haven't got values. If you've got those, at least it's a starting point for people to sort of engage with you. Then they recognize that you're serious with the training. Initially a probationary period. We used to congratulate people when they got through the initial sort of testing quotation marks, but they were mentored and budded right the way through, ongoing with a career plan. So one of the things we learned at IIP and Invest in People was that everybody needs a career plan. And I think, these days anybody joining should expect that initial period of training to be 5 years, which is difficult for millennials, I get. But I think with the right environment, you can show people that if they can give you initially 5 years, you can't keep everybody forever. That's, I suppose I was a bit strange, 3 years in the same place. But, Mary kept my interest in the business because she helped me to develop my career and my skills. And I do think it's possible, obviously, if you enjoy what you're doing. If you don't, that's a different matter. So I think once you've got that mission, the values shared, and you keep celebrating and practicing those values, and then you empower people and you get them qualified and make them realize that you're investing in them, they will then stand behind you. But they'll also walk with you and fly with you, in the sense that they won't fly before they can run, but they will feel confident. And once they understand what their remit is, I mean, so many people ask me to for help and I look at their businesses and they don't have job descriptions, for example. And again, whilst they sound a bit old-fashioned, you know, how you can interview somebody without showing them what the main outline of the job is. And, you know, those jobs will change. So job descriptions need constantly evolving. But all that stuff is inextricably linked. And once you've got all those things in place and then you celebrate success, which we did regularly, you know, then people, I think, will have the confidence to grow and they'll go with you. And I think that's where we were successful. Second to that, you've really got to set the expectations with the clients right from day one, as well as the staff. And obviously in letting and management, that the same applies to the tradespeople and the contractors. So expectations, you know, about standards, what you expect from your landlord and their property, expectations for standards from the people that are going to be letting and managing the property for those clients and working for you, and expectation on standards from the contractors, you know, and how they perform and how they get on with the job in hand and how quickly they do it. And then obviously being a good employer and being a good business in paying those people promptly and correctly and not letting them down. You know, all those things are very important.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to ask you some questions on the back of what you said. Hi, Ruth. Thanks very much for joining us. And oh, there you go. Sue Gidney. Do you know Sue? Richard James. So Sue was a fantastic guest on here as well. Finders keepers were always the ones to watch. A very impressive setup. Thank you.
I would hasten to add, it wasn't just me. I mean, you know, a team of really good people. You know, and just picking up on what I've just said again, really, you know, we mostly stayed there a long time because we enjoyed what we did. We understood it was like a good football team that's working, or a good rugby team. You know, when it clicks together, you know, you want to keep winning and you just want to keep developing. And, you know, I think that's what it's all about.
So you talked about celebrate success. How did you celebrate the successes? What were the rewards?
I mean, they varied. I mean, sometimes they were monetary, hard cash in the pocket. I mean, just for context, we were a non-commission agency. And I think when Countrywide acquired us, that was quite strange for them, because I would say probably 99.9% of all the other businesses that they looked at were all paying some form of commission. So just a bit of historic context to that. We, in those days, when we started in the 80s and late 70s, early 80s, we wanted to have the right tenant in the property, because predominantly our lands were academics letting their own homes while they went to work at another college overseas. So investment properties hadn't really started then. But even the same principle applies with investors. They want to make sure, as far as you can ascertain, the tenant is as good a match to that property. It is still very important. So if you pay people money just to get a deal done, to get somebody in that house, it's not really the right thing. There's a huge difference there between the sale for letting and the sale for estate agency. So we continued that thing. And obviously the issue was, how do you get the staff to be more productive, increase the lets, but not lose sight of those principles of going for the best quality properties, best lets, best tenants. So, you know, we had to work very hard on incentives. So apart from obviously making people feel good and encouraging them, we would reward them basically on our values that we'd set. So when we saw people working the values and using the values, and they changed, you know, they weren't the same continuously, we evolved the values. We had quarterly staff gatherings, and we would deliberately use part of that to explain where we were heading and what we'd achieved, but also then to single people out, you know, deliberately, so that they had to come up on stage and collect an award for you know, to the values that they'd shown that they were demonstrating. And the values actually or the awards were chosen by the staff themselves. So there was quite a lot of peer pressure that developed there, with staff quite happily nominating another colleague because they saw them practicing those values. So it wasn't us in our sort of high chairs at the top of the table, as it were, always making the decisions on who was going to win those awards. It was chosen by the staff. But we celebrated long service, so every 5, 10, 15 years. We had people coming up for 20, 25, 30-year awards. They had, you know, cash awards. We incentivized people to, find new staff for us, and they were often the best staff found by existing staff. So they got a payment for that. The nearest we got to commission was paying staff in a letting side and property management, if they were involved in a deal, to think outside the box from their own office. So if they were letting another office's property, there was a monetary award for thinking outside the box. It's just to make sure that applicants are shared across the company and not kept, as it were, for each office, because that's not how it works. So it was a number of things, and we just tried to be a good employer.
Yeah, we used to have colleague of the month, and we also used to reward people actually for mistake of the month as well. So every office was nominated, and the whole point was that you learned from it. It was a discovery. You would have made that discovery again, and hopefully everybody in the company would learn. We also had a 4-year club. So anybody who stayed longer than 4 years, we would go out to a very nice restaurant every year, or horse racing, or whatever it was. Yeah. So again, it was getting that culture and that buy-in from all your colleagues. Exactly. So how would you go about hiring then? What was your recruitment policy?
Yeah, it was a mix. Again, as I say, the main sort of way we really liked to hire was existing staff to come and say, look, I've got a colleague. In fact, that was most successful. A lot of people that had tried things weren't happy, so they're oh, sorry, my computer's suddenly gone all funny, and I can't see you any longer.
Okay, I can see you and I can hear you. So
I'll try and find you in a minute, but I don't know where you've gone. There we go. It's all happening here now. Somebody hopefully will get that. So I think when staff brought people to us, that was the best way, because they then started doing viewings with us, helping us with our sort of busy viewing schedule. And then if they really liked it, we were able to push them into letting or property management, whichever their skills lay. We were very lucky because we had a good recruitment consultant that ended up working for us. But sometimes clients would give us a call about a son or daughter and say, we like what you're doing, for us, could we, our son or daughter come and work over the summer, and that was a good way. So it was a real mix, really, but we were always on the lookout for good people. One thing we wouldn't do was poach. We felt that was just a step too far. People came to us because they were frustrated or, weren't getting on where they were. It was a real mix.
Okay, so you ended up, I don't know how many properties before you sold, but I know you had at least 3,000 managed properties. You talked about an acquisition service, so presumably that was one of your strategies to get up to 3,000. So if I'm starting today, I'm a little acorn and I want to grow into a big tree, what advice would you give letting agents to become as successful as you were to get to a managed business of over 3,000 properties, which is phenomenal?
Yeah, I think it's several-fold again. Where do I start? I mean, most of our growth was generic in the sense that we just kept expanding the boundaries of each of the offices. And when that office got too large, we then opened another office. Now, I'm not so sure that is sustainable these days in terms of high street premises, and clearly post-COVID, working from home. But I think the principle can still apply. I mean, one of the ways that we did expand was that we worked our clients. So first of all, it's something perhaps we can come on to, but we were great believers in looking after that client and giving them the right advice right from the beginning, and then continuing to give them advice throughout their sort of tenure as being an owner, and hopefully also giving them advice as they got to a certain stage, particularly if they didn't need the income from that property any longer, of showing them how they could continue to retain that wealth, that property wealth in the family. So it really was a long-term thing for us. It's a bit like going to a financial advisor and they talk to you about when you want to take your pension. That might be 20 years, 30 years down the line. Same principle. And you therefore got to sit down with them and plan. So it's not just about taking somebody's house on for the sake of it, just to get the commission rolling in, and seeing how you get on. It's got to be properly planned, and you need to understand what the client's motive is about why they're letting their property and how long that's going to be. So we often found that when we worked with those clients, after a while they built up a certain amount of equity, and we were then able to help them, you know, with our search service that we had, our acquisition service, to use that equity in that property to buy another property. And the momentum gathers, mixed in with networking. I mean, I spent my life after a hard day's work going into local business gatherings, not breakfast meetings. I found the evening meetings were successful, but probably when I should have been at home with my family, I was there talking to people about what Finance Keepers was doing, about how we could help landlords. Next thing, you're talking to a lawyer who's got a client who's got a development. He wants to retain half that development, or he's happy to give you an intro for 10 of the properties before they go on the open market. So all these conversations lead to people understanding that A, you want their business, and B, you've got the expertise to help them when it comes to, you know, buying or looking after a property. So I think it's a number of ways. So first of all, you know, I think there's your existing portfolio, whether you're just starting or whether you've been going a few years, keep talking to your clients, keep giving them regular information and feedback, not just newsletters. One thing we did and still do to this day is that we constantly hold events to the clients where we are talking to them. Obviously, there's an issue at the moment and the physical disadvantage, but Zoom and other things replace that temporarily, hopefully. But talking to the clients and showing them how they can keep expanding their portfolio if they're able to. Not everybody wants to, of course. And of course, they've got friends, they've got colleagues, brothers, etc., sisters, and the whole thing just continues to sort of snowball.
What networking? You talked about evening networking events. Which ones did you find better the most? I mean, one of the things that I understand is there's quite a few property investor network meetings, and I speak to some of the people that run these events, and very rarely are there letting agents there. And actually, you've got such a massive audience because they're all landlords. And they all want to know. I mean, you know, lettings. I know there is so much legislation there, and you know how up to date landlords are with legislation. Well, I'm not convinced, but you know, it's a huge opportunity, and it's something that I don't understand that agents don't utilise more.
Well, effectively, we did our own investor events, and you know, we used to take them on the bus and just take them around developments, take them for lunch. No, the intention wasn't to buy a property, you know, at 5 o'clock when you were getting off the bus and sign a piece of paper. It was to educate them and give them an idea of what they could buy. And so we had our own investor events deliberately. We put regular quarterly reports in the newspaper because most people only look at a newspaper with property for, you know, not to buy or, you know, to rent these days. As we know, it's all switched to electronic medium, but the cohort of landlords who have got money to invest are probably still old-fashioned, in quotation marks, and looking at a newspaper and the property section. So, you know, we deliberately put articles in there about what was a hot area to buy, you know. So the networking really was just us not talking about us all the time, but talking about, you know, giving them examples of how they could become a landlord or how they could expand their portfolio. And then one of the ways that I found good was collaborating with my professional colleagues. So working with a commercial estate agent became very successful partnership because they didn't have the expertise in residential letting, but they did have the expertise in commercial buildings. And then, hey presto, permitted development came along. They were able to say, look, we've got a building, the owner wants to do something with it, we don't need planning permission, what rent could we get? And then we walked into a college in Oxford and said to a bursar, would you be interested in investing in this scheme? Here's the outline returns. And we found they said yes. And the next thing, we were coming off away after a lot of hard work with 20, 30 properties that really started to boost the portfolio. And yes, I had to quite rightly pay the commercial agents some money as an introductory partnership fee, but we were then the beneficiaries of arguably something for 20, 30 years, providing we didn't mess up.
Wow, fantastic. So thanks for all those tips. I know your son's recently bought a property. What was the experience like?
Well, do you know, I don't think you could ever write it, but, you know, obviously having acted for a huge number of investors over the years, and I just thought, you know, it's when you start looking at something for your own son, it starts getting a bit sort of hairy, particularly when he makes an offer 2 weeks before Boris said you must stay at home and lockdown came about. So here we are, his first purchase. You know, it was a funny time, February, March. There wasn't much on the market. You know, prices seemed to be going up. Then we had, you know, lockdown. So there he is. He's made an offer on a property. We can't get hold of anybody. Lawyer we could. They continue to work, but the estate agent seemed to just shut down. So communication was zero there. No direct contact with the owner. It was quite scary as a parent, I have to say, because, you know, should he continue during a pandemic? I mean, I've never experienced anything like, you know, I've seen ups and downs and recessions, you know, Gaddafi and Reagan bombing one another, foot and mouth. We've been through all sorts of ups and downs in Oxfordshire, but never a pandemic. So, you know, I was really quite worried. But do you know what? At the end of it, the bottom line is, like most people, they want to get on with their lives. And he wanted to get on with his life. So things started to move. We got the surveyor around. It was an empty property. So he was able to go in. You know, we worked on the price a little bit based on the survey and just a little bit of a hedge without being silly overpriced, just enough to, you know, feel comfortable. But it was mainly on a few issues that the survey sort of found. And then he exchanged, and now I'm helping him decorate. And, you know, he's completed, and we're trying to get the place ready for him to move into. So I think my biggest learning, and it's like when you teach your children how to drive, when you're in that passenger seat, you suddenly realize how fast things are going, how inconsiderate everybody is. And it's quite scary when you're holding on to the passenger seat with your kids starting to learn to drive. It's quite scary when you've got a first-time buyer and they're getting very, very little information from anybody. There's no help out there. There's nobody helping you. You know, yes, there's advice on the internet. There's all sorts of bits and pieces, but you want somebody who's a human, who's experienced, to sit down with you. In fact, I do stand corrected slightly there. I'll tell you the best advice, and I was really encouraged, was from the mortgage advisor. And I'm very happy to mention them since it's not the BBC. HSBC, the mortgage broker was fantastic. And Hugh was lucky because he got the mortgage just before lockdown. But he spent over 45 minutes not trying to tell him what the actual mortgage rate would be and how much it was going to cost. I was busting for him to just tell Hugh, you know, what he could borrow. He spent a long time making sure Hugh understood what it was he was doing, what the downsides and upsides were, and really making sure that he knew what he was doing. So the training that the HSBC mortgage advisors seem to have had was very encouraging. And also the chap had recently bought a house himself, you know, and then he went into the mortgage rates, and then he went into mortgage protection and income protection, and a few other things. But that advice didn't really come from the estate agent or the lawyer, but at least he got it. And I know it'll be mixed up and down the country. It'll be pot luck. And again, this is, I think, going back to the conversation about Roper, this is why, you know, just like they have to be qualified in the finance world, I think it's just absolutely crucial we get to the stage where all of us involved in the estate agency are qualified.
You touched on ups and downs, and you've seen many ups and downs over the years. And with your experience, how can agents thrive on the letting side and on the sales side with, you know, what's gone on now?
I think, you know, you've just got to keep learning. I know that sounds a bit sort of old hat type cashy, but it is a case of you know, thinking of being ahead. We try to be ahead all the time at FK, just anticipating what might happen. Clearly, government interference is something which is always going to be there in the background. Pandemics and things like that are just going to come from nowhere, so it's difficult to anticipate those. But I think you can thrive by adopting technology, but not letting it be the tail that wags the dog. And I go into so many businesses where the technology, they're just bolting it all on left, right, and center, and it's not really talking to one another. And then they lose the plot, and the staff lose the plot. So I think it's got to be a really good marriage and combination of the right tech, which I grant's difficult to find and also keep up with because it's so fast moving. So certainly taking advice on what the right tech is, making sure then that everybody is trained to use that software, that technology, and then also to just make sure that the human interface is very much there with the customer journey. Despite going all insular at the moment, talking to people on Zoom, I bet the best powerful tool at the moment is the telephone. I think we've lost sight over the years as we've morphed into this sort of, moving away from handwritten letters and posting things to talking. And one of the key things that we found when we held events and we had our new clients coming along, prospective clients mixed in with our old clients and those that, been with us a while, is that actually once we've done our presentations, people just want to talk. And they're very happy to have us there and our staff chipping in, but they actually want to share and talk. And, one of the things we insisted on was that our staff took all our clients out for lunch or for coffee, or at least met on a regular basis, which when they're overseas is difficult. But invariably they flew back in the days when, we were flying a bit more regularly. And we always had time and made time. But it's absolutely crucial to sort of talk to people because, that we're humans and people buy people. And property is actually first about people. You asked about my son and his purchase. It's about him. It's about him getting on the ladder. It's about, that property being right for him initially. But then as he expands or his family comes along, whatever, it's all about people. And, I think when you're in letting and management, you're very much in the middle of people's domestic lives. And that can be quite tricky at times. Okay.
You talk about right tech. Obviously, you go in and see a lot, and I know obviously Mr. Whale, a quiet character in this industry, and obviously he's got Kerfuffle now, and Kerfuffle can go and help look what's out there and maybe save you some money. And I know he saved Spencer some money and some other people. What have you seen that you like the look of?
Well, yeah, I spent 30 years looking at all sorts of different software. Initially we ended up having to write our own software and develop it. And to be honest, we like the look of that simply because we put a lot of money and investment into it. Lately, I've seen a number of different products where, they're evolving along the theme of the sort of trusted advisor. I'm a great believer that I think estate agents are missing a huge trick. The post office used to be the sort of center where we went to collect everything, or sort of pay our TV license and everything. And obviously things have moved on in life. But, the post office master, the sub postmaster would know everything that was going on in the local community or village. You probably wouldn't ask him everything, but he'd probably tell you who the local decorator or gardener was and things like that. And indeed, there would probably be a little notice board next door where people put their cards. I just think estate agents are missing a trick, and certainly letting agents and property managers. You are in the center of somebody's community, and you have the tools to be able to provide them with decorators, provide them with gardeners, provide them with advice on how to buy a property or expend your equity, which mortgage broker to go to. And I just don't think we make enough of sort of saying, arms open, come to us, whatever your property query is, and we will help you. And I've noticed some of the software now is beginning to finally realize that it's actually about the end user. So it's not about the property manager or letting agent or the estate agent that's using the software. The software needs to actually go further. And if we've got a dashboard that gives a certain amount of compliance information, and I'm talking property letting and management here, if it's showing me when the electrical safety, gas safety is coming up, it's showing me when I last did the bathroom or upgraded the kitchen, why isn't it showing the client who owns the property when the kitchen was upgraded? So we made it very obvious to any software company that we were talking to that we needed information to be visible and transparent, not just for us, but for the clients. And I think the more transparent and helpful the software is, and if you can share that with the clients, then it makes it much easier to charge a good fee. And, you know, this software is not cheap, and it's normally a subscription basis. And it's so easy to cut back and not have these things because it looks expensive. But, you know, so I've seen software recently as much more sort of helpful. I can't think of a better word at the moment, to sort of both the owner of the property and you know, the people that are operating it. Yeah, I've seen some very clever stuff recently, which is looking at how quickly it's going to take people to get to a viewing, you know, what the best route is, software that's tracking capital values. I've yet to really come across any software that is really helping property managers and morph from being a property manager to an asset manager, which is where I think the property management sector needs to go. So yes, there's lots of indices, and you can go on and have a look at Home Track. You can go and look at what Rightmove have got. You can look at the land registry. So I'd like to see software going down the direction where, for an asset manager who's qualified and has got experience, and he's sitting there getting his clients to buy more property, that software needs to be tracking real-time capital values, helping them show the real-time return on the investment. I probably are going to stand corrected here, but let's see. I don't know how much software out there, and there can't be a great deal, I'm sure, that is actually giving you the return on the investment. And I bet a lot of it's not showing sight, obviously, of the client's bank account, because historically that's been very private. But were the software able to show what income and expenditure is going on, then you can tell somebody the gross and the net return. And then I think we're really getting somewhere.
Okay, I guarantee you now, when Spencer's watching this, that will be done by tomorrow.
Okay, well, I'll be delighted to hear it, because, you know, how can you be an asset manager and a property manager if you don't know what the capital value is and you don't really know how the property is performing? You know, I was guilty for saying, I'll get you a 6% or 5% return on this property if you buy it, Mr. Landlord. But how many of us in the property management world are then actually saying, and by the way, at the end of the first year, you hit the 4% or 5%. Second year, you know, we're not giving the full picture to our clients. And that information, I think, you get from a building society or a bank account or your ISA. You know, why aren't we giving that information as property managers?
Brilliant, thank you. Couple of final questions, because I'm really grateful for your time. I can hear your stomach rumbling from here. So, how do you keep yourself, you know, when you were how do you keep yourself motivated, and what did you do to self-improve?
Well, I had a very good listener, I have to say. My wife, when I was frustrated, was always, still is to this day, very willing to listen. And, you know, I think that for me has been a huge benefit. Somebody to sound off and bounce ideas off. You know, Mary, you know, I have to say, was always very good at picking me up when I was down, but a lot of it you have to do yourself. I got to a very bad point, I think, probably about 10 years before I finally moved on from, you know, the coalface. And I just thought, you know, I've done this for so long, I don't think I can continue. And then I heard Peter Knight speaking at an event about giving advice to groups who are specializing in either estate agency and so on and so forth. And, you know, I hadn't really met Peter at that point. I'd always been a long-term active member of ALA and NAA before it separated with ALA. So I was on subcommittees and this, that, and the other. So that was one way of me advancing and keeping up to date. And I think meeting fellow colleagues outside of Oxfordshire, you know, collaborating, meeting 6 times a year, made me realise that actually there was a different world out there beyond Oxford. I learned so much from sharing ideas and working with people who've become, you know, friends and colleagues. I even ended up going to speak at conferences in Australia and New Zealand on the back of connections, you know, through Peter and others. So I think, you know, I'd urge anybody who's just thinking, how can they develop? Not only should they be a member of a professional body, they should participate in the functions and seminars, but also go and visit colleagues, you know, in different cities and towns and see what they're doing. Ask them if you can come along. And, you know, obviously the immediate competition is probably not going to be that willing to let you go and browse around their office, but there's a huge amount you can gain from talking to fellow, you know, estate agents.
100%. I mean, there's so many great Facebook groups out there. There's so much, you know, there's so much more collaboration. I remember Spencer and I were neighbours. I didn't know Spencer for 20 years that I was there, and actually I didn't want to know him, and I regret, you know, that I didn't. You know, because actually maybe we could have learned a lot of each other. But there's definitely, the industry is working together a lot more to collaborate and help each other, and actually that can only be a good thing for the most important people in here, which is the customer, the consumer. You know, and if everybody here that can make a difference for the customer and consumer, then standards will be raised, and that's what we want. You know, you mentioned rightly agents being trusted advisors, and our industry, sadly, our profession has got such bad names that, you know, hopefully now with all this collaboration, it will change, and people will see us as these trusted advisors and these asset managers, which,
well, I think
which is what we're there to be.
Collaboration is the perfect word to finish on, because I've been working with the Home Buying Selling Group and the Lettings Industry Council, which is a collaboration of at least 100 plus different stakeholders, and at last the banking industry is meeting with us, with the letting industry, with the estate industry, with the surveyors, with the conveyancers, and with local government, with ministers who are reporting back to the housing minister, and the government ministers, the civil servants are sitting there in our midst telling us how government would like to see things, and we're sitting there telling them how we want to see things, and we're actually collaborating, working together. Instead of sending stroppy emails, writing silly things on the internet, we're actually all around the table, you know, working to collaborate to make a better industry, which is what happened, I believe, in the airline industry many years ago, when all the stakeholders got together and realized that if the airline industry was to improve safety and make the journeys better, they needed to work together. And, you know, there's some really good stuff going on out there, which is good, and hopefully government will just sign it all off in due course, and we'll see the Roper thing moving forward, but more that the industry will continue to collaborate.
Brilliant. Look, you have been a phenomenal guest. I'm really grateful for your time. I'm really grateful for you coming on here. So thank you. So thank you so much. Thank everybody for watching today. If you're watching it on replay, thank you very much. Next Tuesday, I've got Michelle Gallagher from JDG Estate Agents in Lancaster. She's going to share all her secrets of how she sold about 80 properties since lockdown, which is absolutely phenomenal. Plus also how Facebook is working really well for her, and the use of e-guides, and actually how 90% of her market appraisals at the moment are being done virtually rather than physically. So thanks very much, everybody, for watching. Frank, thank you so much for your time. You've been an amazing guest. Spencer was right about the godfather of lettings. My dogs are saying goodbye to you as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon and weekend.
Cheerio.